Steve invites me into the house. He was not there. Steve sticks his hand out and points to the ground. He has his knees on the ground. I had to look down to see him, and Steve had to look up to see me. Now I get on my knees with Steve. As Steve decides to look even lower to the ground, I did this too. Steve noticed that things look different at ground level. I turned my body around as I looked around the door at the ground level. Suddenly, someone came in through the door flap. Steve wanted to know who came in that way. It was Blue. Blue started barking excitedly. She tells Steve that she saw something too. Steve asks Blue what she saw, and Blue leaves a paw print up. Steve thinks Blue wants him to play Blue's Clues to figure out what Blue saw. Because Steve was looking at stuff, he interacts with the paw print. The paw print squeaks and hops. Steve gets out a mirror, and the paw print was amazed. Its reflection does the paw print did. Steve explained that it was time to play Blue's Clues. The paw print hops away and squeaks. We are going to play Blue's Clues. After that, Steve goes to get his notebook from the side table. Steve goes up close to her and explains that he has come to get his notebook. Whoa, goes side table, and he notices that Steve was up close. Side table opens up, and I get a close-up look inside the drawer. Steve reaches and grabs the notebook out of the drawer. Steve thanks side table, and side table says, "You're welcome," and closes her drawer. Steve needed help trying to figure out what Blue saw. We sing the Blue's Clues demo tune, and after that, Steve asks me where Blue went. Blue's reflection appears as she went to the left. Steve said, "How did you see that?" And he realized that I saw Blue's reflection in the mirror. Then Steve started looking for those clues. I pointed out a clue on the table. Steve saw the first clue, and it was sticks. Steve picks up the sticks, and he was amazed that the sticks look different when they are seen through the water. Steve gets out his notebook and draws the first clue, which was sticks. Steve needed more information on what Blue saw by finding 2 more clues. Now it was time to look at everyday things using the kaleidoscope with Blue. I looked through the kaleidoscope and saw the sofa with purple cushions, and then I saw blocks. Steve looks through the kaleidoscope and found books on the bookshelf. Blue takes her turn and saw the fish in the fishbowl. Now I had to turn and saw many things through the kaleidoscope. I see a globe, a hanging plant, and a butterfly on a tree, which after flying away revealed a paw print on the tree, which I also saw through the kaleidoscope. Steve saw the tree was the second clue. He gets out the kaleidoscope by mistake when he meant to get was his notebook, and he did so get his notebook. He then starts drawing out the second clue, which was a tree. Steve had to figure out with me what Blue saw with sticks in a tree. Steve needed one more clue to figure out the answer. Suddenly, it was mail time. Steve and Blue sing the mail time song, and Mailbox comes in through the window. As Mailbox opened his flap, Steve gets the kaleidoscope out and thought they could get so much mail, but it's only 1 letter through the kaleidoscope. Steve gets the letter and thanked Mailbox, and he said, "You're welcome," and left. Steve opens the letter, and it was 3 boys trying to figure out what was under the green blanket. They saw something big and brown, a tail that is long and furry. They also saw something white and gold and was soft. When they lifted the blanket together, it was a stuffed lion. Steve closes the letter and mentions that things look different depending on how you look at them. Suddenly, the computer turns on and a voice says, "Steve! Steve!" He goes to Blue on the computer and saw that the voice was a squirrel. She went to Steve. Blue and Steve. She went to Steve asked Squirrel, "What's up?" And Squirrel says, "I need your help. Someone's calling me, but I don't know who." So Blue skedoos into the computer to help out Steve skedoos too. After that, Steve saw that Squirrel had a great playground. A voice says, "Yoo-hoo," and then Steve and Squirrel stop. Steve asks who that was. Squirrel was not sure, and that was what she was trying to figure out. Steve calls back going, "Yoo-hoo," and asks for a hint on where they are. The voice says, "I can see a slide and a seesaw. Everything is upside down." So Steve and Squirrel got a hint and learned that the animal saw a slide, a seesaw, and thinks everything is upside down. There's a monkey, a bird, and a chipmunk. I thought it was the monkey, because the monkey is the one who can see a slide and a seesaw, but that everything is upside down. Steve and Squirrel checked, and they were right. Steve and Squirrel looked upside down, and the monkey was onto something. They did so see the slide on the seesaw as they looked upside down. Suddenly, a different voice goes, "Yoo-hoo," twice. Steve asks who that was, and Squirrel says, "I don't know," causing the monkey to laugh silently. So they check out who went yoo-hoo in the first place. Steve and Squirrel sit on a bench. The voice went yoo-hoo again. Squirrel calls out this time by going yoo-hoo and asks for a hint. The voice says, I can see under this bench and there's a big red flower right in front of me. So now that Steve and Squirrel heard what it said, they have to figure out who it was under the bench and can see a big red flower. It was either the caterpillar, the bee, or the inchworm. I think the inchworm was under the bench and saw a big red flower. Steve and Squirrel had to go low to the grass to see the inchworm, and they were right again. Steve and Squirrel looked at Inchworm's point of view and noticed by looking into the bench it was very difficult. The red flower looks very big from ground level. Then a ladybug appears from behind the big red flower. After that, Steve and Squirrel heard another voice saying, yoo-hoo, out loud. Who was that? Asked Steve. Squirrel says, it's coming from over here. Come on. The inchworm gives a goodbye by moving its body side to side. Steve calls out and asks what it can see from where they are. The voice says, I can see white flowers and some orange goldfish swimming all around. Steve and Squirrel heard that the mystery animal can see white flowers and goldfish swimming around. It's either the frog, the bird, or the duck. I thought it was the bird on the bridge. Steve and Squirrel checked to be sure, and it was the bird, and then Steve and Squirrel looked at Bird's point of view. As they looked, they saw the whole pond with water, lilies, and all those fish swimming around. And then another voice goes yoo-hoo, which caused Steve to shrug. The squirrel knew that the voice was her mom calling out and having to go home. Steve says goodbye to Squirrel. After that, Steve saw there's a clue on 3 eggs. Steve gets a notebook out and draws the 3rd clue, which is eggs. After drawing the 3rd clue, Steve realized that whenever he says our 3rd clue, Steve has collected all 3 clues, which meant that it was time to go sit in the thinking chair. But to that, Steve and Blue had to skidoo out of the computer to get back home. They did so, and Steve sits in the thinking chair. Now it was time for a clue review. Steve and I have to figure out what Blue saw. The clues were sticks, a tree, and eggs. Steve wondered what Blue saw with sticks, tree, and eggs. Steve realized that Blue had to be outside to see a tree. Thought Blue would have to look up at the tree. Steve thinks that Blue probably saw a tree with sticks in it, and also thought there could be eggs in the middle of the sticks. Steve is still wondered what Blue saw and asks me what I thought Blue saw. I believe Blue saw a bird's nest. Steve clarifies the answers to Blue and thought Blue was looking up at a tree and saw a nest made of sticks with eggs inside it. Steve and I figured out Blue's clues, so Steve wanted to see the nest Blue saw. Blue goes out and Steve says, wait for us. Steve opens the door and it closes behind him just as he got outside. Steve said it is right there and Blue barks at it. Steve can see the eggs in the nest. Blue looks through the nest with the kaleidoscope, and then we see Squirrel. Steve reviews to me how we figured out who you hooed at them in the park. Suddenly, the eggs started moving and shaking, and then one of the eggs broke and a baby bird pokes his head out the eggshell. Steve and Blue go for a closer look. The remaining 2 eggs cracked. Their eggshells broke, and 2 more baby birds poked their heads out. Steve and Blue saw the baby birds. Steve figured out that Blue did so see the nest filled with eggs, and they just hatched. Steve sings the so long song outside as he continued. The mommy bird came to check on her babies. After that, Steve waves goodbye to the baby birds.